So we are up.
So we're up. We'll be starting in about 2 or 3 minutes. We'll just sort of bring people in early because that way we're actually here. There's some confusion as to whether we're starting at 3 or 3:30. Well, we'll keep on going until whenever we're going on till, but we are actually going to get started for real at the half past. So if there's any questions in the meantime, feel free to use the chat. Feel free to say hi. Feel free to interact with the other participants. I was talking to someone sitting at the tables earlier, and he's dealing in smart ports. So if you're in smart ports, try interacting with other people on smart ports. Try to standardize your data models. Try to make sure that what you're doing doesn't conflict with someone else. I know we've got some like 4 or 5 agricultural projects. And one of the jobs, the coordination, the mentoring, and what have you, is to make sure that that the data from one experiment will nicely feed in elsewhere. But we're only going to be able to do that if we're talking. Now, of course, you heard me talking for about 3 hours yesterday, so it's my turn to shut up. We're going to pass you over to Alvaro Alonso. So I'm going to switch my camera off and go off and learn something. Speak to you later, guys.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, we are on time. So let's start with this session. Let me share my screen. Okay, so now you should see the presentation. So let's go. Yeah, as Jason has already mentioned, my name is Álvaro Alonso. I'm professor at UPM, the Technical University of Madrid, Spain. I've been working in FIWARE from the very beginning of the project, more than 10 years ago. At the beginning, I was more related with the software components related with cloud management. We were very focused on deploying and developing components for managing cloud resources, mainly based on OpenStack integration, and we made a set of adaptations of the different components that OpenStack offer at that moment. But then, few years later, I started working on the security chapter, in which we firstly started modifying Keystone, the identity component of OpenStack, in order to adapt it to the specific requirements we had at this point in FIWARE. So we used at that point Keystone for managing all the stuff related with security and access control in FIWARE. With the years, we were learning several things about these identity management components. And at one point, a few years ago, we decided to develop a new component specifically designed for FIWARE in order to manage identity and access control in FIWARE, because Keystone is a very huge project with a lot of parts that were very focused and very oriented to the cloud resources management. So we decided to apply the learned concepts in order to develop a new set of components specifically designed and covering the specific requirements of FIWARE and the FIWARE ecosystem components. So today I'm here for giving you an introduction of this set of components that are aimed for solving the identity management and access control requirements of FIWARE-based services and applications. I'm going to give you a conceptual introduction of the components we are using or we are offering in FIWARE, the features each component has and the design objectives of those components. And then my colleague Álvaro Arranz will show you more details about how to integrate these components in order to perform or to adapt them for working with a specific use case, and in order to offer a set of services with identity management and access control features totally covered by these components. Okay, so let's go with this brief introduction about the FIWARE security components. As you know, probably yesterday you learned a lot of things about FIWARE ecosystem and different components that allow the development and configuration of the FIWARE components. So we are offering a framework of a set of open source components that can be used together and also combined with other with third-party components, because we are always following standards in order to develop a smart solution. So every smart solution that you can imagine in every scenario and every use case can be easily deployed and configured, taking advantage of the FIWARE ecosystem components. So we have a lot of components. Here you have some examples about different components we have: CCAN-based components, Cosmos, Wildcloud, etc. So, here we have the one for Curento for managing real-time video processing and so on. But as I said before, thanks to FIWARE ecosystem, FIWARE components, you can also develop your own components, because we are always using open source components. We are always using standards. So you can easily develop and design your own components based on the already existing ones, or even from scratch by combining them with the existing FIWARE components. Okay, so in order to offer these components, both the existing ones and the ones you have developed by your own, of course, you will have users that are accessing these components. You will have final users that are going to consume data on your components or FIWARE components that are consuming services or whatever, but not also users, but also devices. We are always talking about a smart solution. We are talking about smart cities. We are talking about Industry 4.0. We are talking about smart data spaces and so on. So probably you will have devices, not only users, that are accessing your services and applications in order to consume data or to provide data. And also we are offering in these components APIs. So probably a part of users and devices, you will have also other applications interacting with the other developed applications and existing FIWARE applications. As you can imagine, when you are talking about sharing data, consuming information, offering different kind of services and facilities, identity is crucial. Identity is crucial because you have to manage a huge amount of profiles of the users, the devices, the applications, and so on. And the central component in FIWARE that is offering identity management in order to authenticate users, in order to store users' profiles, in order to manage the information related with those users and those devices and applications, is Keyrock. That is the central application, the central service, the central security component that we have developed for managing FIWARE identity. But of course, once you have identity, you have to manage the way in which these users, these services, these devices access the information provided by the others, or also provides information in order to store here new data or to consume a service or whatever. And in order to do that, you need access control. So you need a set of mechanisms in order to manage which of these entities, users, devices, applications, and so on, can access specific information or can provide specific information, modify, delete the information, read the information, or whatever. So you need to manage the way in which these entities access the information available here in these services and in these applications. And in order to manage access control, we are providing also a combination of several components, FIWARE components, in order to facilitate your life as a developer or as a service provider. Okay. So basically, in order to provide these features, in order to provide a way for managing identity and also a way for managing access control, we are basically providing in the core of the FIWARE security chapter these three components. So we have KeyRock, the central identity management component. We have BILMA, a PEP proxy, policy enforcement point proxy. We will see later how we are also compatible with other PEPs available nowadays. And finally, we have a policy decision point, outside a force, that, as we will see later, is not required for the basic use cases, but can you offer advanced possibilities in, let's say, complex authorization scenarios. Okay, so these are the three core components offered in the FIWARE security chapter. And what I'm going to do now is to explain them one by one to see the specific functionalities and features we are offering in the three components. And then we will see how to put all of them together in order to perform different identity and access control configurations. Okay, so first of all, we will see one by one the features that are offered by them, then some sample architectures that are the basic ones, probably the ones you are going to use in your services and applications. And then for finishing this introduction part, I will see some interesting features we are offering a part of managing the traditional identity and access control management, thanks also to these components and some of the features they are offering. Okay, so KeyRock is the central component, as I said before, the identity manager component. Here you have the web page, the main web page of KeyRock, where you will see a list of the features available in the last release of KeyRock. And also you will find here the main pointers, the main links to the helpful information we have available for KeyRock and also for the other components. So you will see here in this web page a kind of an entry point, a single entry point for then going to the different documentation pages, the GitHub repository where the source code is located and where you can contribute to the component, also to find the contribution guide and so on. We are also including in this page some links to the APIs available in KeyRock, because as we will see later, we are offering in KeyRock both a graphical user interface and also an API management interface for applications and backend components. So yeah, please go to this web page and you will find there all the information about KeyRock. And some links to the interesting information available there in the internet. You will also find, of course, there the ways for contacting us, the development team of the security chapter. So in case you have any doubt, any suggestion, any discussion you want to have with us, please feel free to go there, or even to contact me directly in my email address that I have provided you at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, so Keyrock main features. As I said before, we are offering a web interface, so a graphical user interface for consuming information and managing identity information in Keyrock, and also a REST API available for accessing and managing identity information. Thanks to Keyrock, you can manage users, devices, and also groups of both users and devices. So you can register users. Of course, we are offering a self-registration mechanism, but also a panel in which you can register users from an administration interface, and you can also register devices in order to provide them with some credentials and let them the possibility of accessing information, consuming information, defining access control policies for them. Okay. The authentication mechanisms we are using for authorization are based on OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. So thanks to Keyrock, you can register applications using both OAuth and OpenID Connect, register external applications in order to get access, in order to let your users being able to log in on your applications by delegating the authentication and authorization to Keyrock. So basically providing a single sign-on mechanism centralizing Keyrock. And also you can define a scoped roles and permissions to your application. So this means that a single user can have different roles, different permissions, different access control policies, depending on the application in which the user is working. So you can define 2, 3, 4 applications, register them in Keyrock, and then every user will be able to log in such applications using their Keyrock accounts, and depending on the specific roles and permissions that have been defined in the scope of each application, they will have different roles and different access control policies for managing information in the different applications. Okay, so this is what is called a scoped roles and permissions management. In order to manage this access control, you can use the built-in PAP and PDP feature we are including in Keyrock. I will show you an example later. Or you can configure an external PAP PDP component. Okay, we will see the details about this later, but it's very interesting to have the possibility of having this built-in PAP and PDP inside Keyrock in order to let you manage basic authorization policies without having to relay on an external PDP component. We are also supporting JSON Web Tokens, and also a feature for administrators supporting what we have called permanent tokens. Of course, we support two-factor authentication, and regarding data persistence, we are compatible with SQL-based databases. We are using SQLize, so every database compatible with SQLize, mainly MySQL and PostgreSQL, will be compatible with Keyrock. So you can directly store information about users, organizations, roles, permissions, and so on in these SQL-based databases, but we are also supporting an external driver in order to connect Keyrock to already existing databases. So if you already have your existing users database and you don't want or you cannot migrate those users to a new database, don't worry, because you can deploy your instance of Keyrock and delegate the authentication to the already existing users database. Okay, so in this case, all the Keyrock needed information will be stored in the Keyrock database, but the authentication process will be relayed to your existing database. Your existing database can be any kind of database. You can use other SQL-based SQL databases, and you can also use LDAP-based directories. And finally, for finishing these main features of Keyrock, we are supporting. I will show you later an example, but we are supporting connectivity with eIDAS specification, with the European eIDAS specification. Okay, that's about Keyrock. And then we have Vilma, that is the second component we are offering, the PEP proxy for securing services. This is a component that you have to deploy on top of your services in order to manage who can access specific resources deployed on your backend. So thanks to Vilma, you can manage basic and advanced access control policies. I will see you the details later. Of course, Vilma is compatible with OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and JSON Web Tokens. And Vilma allows also the configuration of custom policy decision point interfaces. So you can relay on Keyrock in order to check policies, or you can relay on any external policy decision point in order to check policies before letting a user or a request to go through your backend service. We have also support with other API management tools, like, for instance, API Umbrella. My colleague Alvaro Arranz will show you details later. And finally, we are offering an advanced PAP and PDP server for managing XACML-based policies. This component is called i4Trust and is maintained by Thales, some developers on Thales company. And yeah, we are supporting on i4Trust the latest standards, the latest versions of XACML. And it's also very, very flexible in terms of configuration of the different policies and the different profiles you can manage in i4Trust. As we will see later, just for complex cases in which you have to manage very advanced access control policies, you will need to use XACML, because it's not an easy standard to learn. So probably in the typical cases of your services and applications, it will be enough with using the built-in PAP and PDP component available in Keyrock. Okay, so yeah, we will see later an example. Okay, so once we have seen the three components we are offering in the core of FIWARE security chapter, let's say how it works, how all this stuff works in the typical authentication flow. Here you can see the typical OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect flow, in which you have an entity, can be a user, a device, or even an application that is going to consume data in a service. Okay. Okay, so once this service and these users or device or whatever has been registered in the identity management, in our case in Keyrock, both the user and the application will be able to establish a OAuth2 flow between the service and the identity management in order to authenticate the entity and to provide an access token, an OAuth2 or an OpenID access control, OpenID Connect token that represents the user or the device or the service in terms of authorization. So basically here what is happening is that the developer of this application has to register in the identity manager this application in order to be able to generate this access token on behalf of the end user or device or whatever. So when the user or the entity wants to log in the application will use specific OAuth2 or OpenID Connect flows in order to share information, to interchange some flows with the IDM in order to obtain this access token that can be used later in order to get the information about the entity. Regarding these flows, in case you are using OAuth2, you have different grant types, what are called grant types, that basically are different mechanisms available in the protocol in order to obtain this access control. Depending on the type of user or entity that is trying to authenticate, and also depending on the type of application, if it's a web-based application or if it's a service, a backend service, you will have to use a different grant type that basically is, as I said before, a different mechanism in order to retrieve the access token using both the user credentials and the application's credentials that have been obtained at registration time in the IDM. Okay, so of course in the documentation of Keyrock you have some information about the different grant types and also some links in order to get the protocol information, because this is of course the specification of OAuth and OpenID Connect. But I'm not going to enter in details here about the different grant types and so on, but basically are HTTP requests that are interchanged between the two parties. Okay, if you are using this scenario not to access directly the information available on your application or the information about the user stored in the IDM, but you want to consume data from other services or third-party services, what we are offering in FIWARE is a way of taking advantage of these OAuth2 tokens, these access tokens, in order to be able to check authorization in the external services. So basically the flow consists on getting the information about the user getting the access token, the authorization token that represents the user, and using it trying to access the backend service or the service where we want to consume information. Using this mechanism, the backend service, thanks to the PEP proxy, will be able to check the details about the specific user or device or whatever that is trying to access the application. And thanks to the connection with the identity and access management infrastructure, we will see in the next slides the details about this, to check if the user or the device or whatever is authorized to perform the action or to retrieve the information that is trying to access. So basically, as I said, don't worry about the details of this figure, because I'm going to explain you step by step how it works. But basically, for having the general idea of the scenario, the thing is that the devices or the users authenticate using the mechanisms we have just seen in the previous slide through the IDM, thanks to the OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect specification. Then the service gets this OAuth 2 token that represents the user in terms of authorization, and using the token, the service backend, thanks to the PEP, can check with the identity and access management infrastructure the terms, the authorization details about the user, in order to decide if the action that is trying to perform is permitted or not. Okay, in order to perform this authorization check, we are offering different levels of authorization in FIWARE. So this is why this is the general architecture in which you have the general idea of how it works, and then I'm going to show you the details about how this mechanism works in what we have called 3 levels of authentication and authorization. So from the very basic level, in which we just check if the user is authenticated, has been correctly authenticated or not in the platform, in the identity manager, to the more complex level, what we have called level 3, in which you can check XACML advanced, not necessarily XACML. We will see later how we configure this authorization level, but in this case you can check different levels of policy checks for accessing the information in the backend. So let's see with detail the different 3 levels of authorization we have defined. The first one, we call it level 1, in which you check just authentication. You check just if a user has been correctly authenticated in the identity manager. So here you just need the KeyRock IDM, and of course an instance of the PEP proxy that is the component that will check the authorization. Well, in this case, just authentication every time a user, a device, or an application, an entity is trying to access some information in a service. So in this case, once the user has authenticated in your service using the OAuth 2 mechanism, so using the credentials stored in the KeyRock database, KeyRock will generate a token, an access token, that has to be included in every request you send to the service in which you want to consume information. Deploying an instance of the PEP proxy of Vilma on top of the backend, you are able to intercept every request, extract the access token from the request, and send a request to the IDM, to KeyRock, in order to check if the token is valid. So in order to check if the user has been correctly authenticated in KeyRock before performing this action. So if the user has been correctly authenticated, so if the token is valid, the PEP proxy will allow the request and will redirect it to the backend in order to continue with the process. If not, if the token is not valid, so if in this check you get a non-permit response, the PEP proxy will respond back with an authorized response, and in this case the request will not be allowed. Okay. Of course, here using this configuration, you are able to use 2 different configurations. you can here allow in the PEP proxy allow actions from every user registered in Keyrock, independently of if the user is authenticated in the scope of this specific application, or you can just allow requests of users that have been authenticated in the specific application. So remember that when a user tries to authenticate here, and the authentication process is delegated to Keyrock, the authentication is scoped to a specific application, to a specific service that has to be previously registered in Keyrock. So in policy decision time, you can configure the PEP proxy to allow the performing of this action to every user registered in Keyrock, independently of the application, or you can restrict the actions to users that have been authenticated in the specific application that is performing the request. So you have the two possibilities, right? Okay, this is the level 1 basic authentication. In the level 2, we have basic authorization. So in this case, we are not checking only if a user has been authenticated in the platform, but also if the user has the needed permissions to access a specific resource. These permissions in this level 2 of authorization are defined in form of an action and a resource. So actions are HTTP verbs and resources are paths of the URL. So in this case, again, you just need to deploy an instance of Keyrock and an instance of the PEP proxy on top of your service. But in this case, the PEP proxy is checking, of course, if the user is authenticated, and in this case, always if the user is authenticated in the scope of the specific application, because take into account that authorization policies are defined on the scope, always on the scope of an application. But the PEP proxy will also check if the request that the user is trying to perform is allowed. So if the user or the entity has the specific permission that permit the specific permissions, the specific policies that permit the performing of the action. As I said before, this is defined in terms of actions and resources. So for instance, imagine that this is a service in which you are offering a blog with different entries, different posts, and you want to define administration policies for some users that will be able not only to read the post, but also to, for instance, delete them. In this case, you will have to define here in Keyrock a policy that allows to perform delete actions on the resources, for instance, / posts. So when the user is trying to send here an HTTP request that consists on a delete in blah.com/posts, the PEP proxy will check, thanks to this token, if the specific user has assigned in the scope of this application this specific policy that allows to perform the delete actions in the specific resource. If the check success, the PEP proxy will send the request to the backend, and if not, of course, the PEP proxy will reject the request. Okay. Yeah, I'm always talking about deploying a PEP instance on top of your backend, But this is just in case you are using here your custom service backend. But please take into account that almost all the components we are offering in FIWARE have a built-in PEP proxy inside. All the components that are offering a kind of API for consuming information are offering a PEP that is built directly inside of the component. So using this architecture, you will be able to access data or to consume data in FIWARE-based components without having to deploy your own PEP component. But in case you are offering your own API or your own service, you will be able to put on top of the service this PEP component, or as Alvaro will show you later, other API management tools, like for instance API Umbrella, that are also compatible with this scenario. Finally, the level 3 allows you to configure advanced policies for managing your resources. So please take into account that using this level 2, the example we have just seen, you are able to configure policies based on an action specified by the HTTP verb and a resource specified by the path on the URL of the resource. But what happens if, for instance, you want to check some information available in the body of the request or available in the headers of the request? Okay, in this case, you will have to use this level 3 of authorization, in which we rely to the AuthSetaForce component. In this case, you will have to define the policies using XHTML specification. We are offering a simplified interface in Keyrog in order to create the policies and send them to AuthSetaForce. And then when checking policies, the PEP will first validate the token through the Keyrog component and then validate the roles through the PDP, through the AuthSetaForce. In this case, here in this request and also in this request, we are using XHTML policies that are stored in the database available in AuthSetaForce. Okay, as I said before, Keyrog also supports JSON Web Tokens. Probably all of you already know what is the JSON Web Token standard. And in case you use JSON Web Tokens, as the information is included in the JSON Web Token, you have not to check authorization with the IDM, because the information is available inside the JSON Web Token, and the PEP proxy can validate the token without relying to the IDM. So in case you configure your application, because this is a configuration that can be done by application, registering Keyrog, in case you configure your application in Keyrog for using JSON Web Tokens, you will be able to directly validate the tokens in the PEP without having to send the validation request to Keyrog. Okay. Of course, if you want to not only validate the token, but you want to perform the second level of authorization and validate permissions, you will have to go again to the IDM in order to check the permissions, because in the token you have just a list of roles and the information about the user. But yeah, if you want to check if a specific role allows to perform a specific action in the service backend, yeah, you will have to check it with Kirok. Okay, so with this we have the basic functionalities offered by these FIWARE components. And to finish my part, I'm going to explain you some additional features that are available in Kirok and that we think are very interesting for some use cases. So these are, let's say, not part of the basic features offered by Kirok, but yeah, there are additional functionalities that can be used and that are available from the latest releases of Kirok. This is about identity attributes. This feature allows you to define some attributes in Kirok available when services consume data about the user. So when services validates the token of a specific user, these identity attributes will be returned to the services. But it's important to take into account that these attributes are globally defined for the user. So these are not scoped to a specific application, but are defined at the level of the profile, the global profile of the user in Kirok. There are a lot of applications of this functionality, but we have provided the typical one that is for providing accessibility and for being able to offer personalized user interfaces to the users depending on the identity of each user. You have here a research paper in which we explain this application for providing accessibility in services. So, for instance, if you are offering a service, you can personalize the different interfaces that you offer to the user based on the user attributes, the identity attributes that have been previously defined in Kirok. As I explained at the beginning, Kirok is compatible with external databases in order to perform the authentication. So in Kirok, you have an external authentication driver that allows you to configure Kirok to relay the authentication to an external database. So in this case, for instance, imagine that you have an LDAP server with an already existing set of users with their usernames, password, personal information, and so on. If you configure Kirok following this documentation that I have included here, for relaying authentication to this existing database of users, the Kirok database will only keep information about specific Kirok information. For instance, organizations, applications that are registered in Kirok, roles, policies, and so on. But the information about the username and the password of the users will be kept in your existing LDAP server in this case, but not only LDAP is supported. You could have a SQL-based database, and it's also compatible with this external authentication driver. So every time an external application tries to authenticate a user using OAuth 2, we in Kirok send the authentication request to the existing database. So we are not storing information about the username and the password in Kirok, and we are relaying to this external database. This is very useful because we had sometimes requests from developers that wants to maintain their database of users, but wants to start using Kirok for managing authentication, authorization, and so on, but without having to migrate the existing database of users, because this is a problem most of the times. Okay, so this is really nice. API umbrella, okay, I'm not going to enter in details here because Alvaro Arranz is going to show you some details about this, but basically what we are offering here is compatibility with this kind of API management tools that are thought for centralizing in a same service the access to different APIs using typically an API key. FIWARE security components are compatible with this kind of services, for instance, with API umbrella. So you are able to define or to configure an API umbrella, a set of backends, and then instead of using the API keys, the typical API keys of API umbrella, you can use the access token obtained from Keyrock in order to access the different backends, keeping the functionalities for checking authentication and authorization with the FIWARE identity and access management infrastructure. Okay. And finally, I would like to show you this interesting feature that is related with support to eIDAS. Probably you already know what eIDAS is. It's a new regulation of the member states in Europe that aims to provide a common frame for managing identity in digital services in Europe. As you know, every country manages their own electronic identification mechanism. So, for instance, here in Spain, we have the digital certificate that allows us to access public services and to perform digital signatures and so on. And thanks to this eIDAS specification, every European citizen is able to perform this kind of actions in a foreign country using their origin electronic identification. So, for instance, if I'm going to consume a service, for instance, in German, I can use my Spanish electronic identification, in my case, the digital certificate, in order to log in the German service. Then, thanks to the eIDAS specification, there are a set of what are called eIDAS nodes that uses a SAML-based mechanism in order to federate the request, some kind of federation of request, interchange some information here, and finally validate the request and allowing me to access, to securely access the service deployed in German using my Spanish eID. This is a very interesting feature that is already working on Europe. And what we are offering in Keyrock is a gateway in order to be able to connect every FIWARE-based application with this eIDAS infrastructure. So if you have an application registered in Keyrock, you can easily configure it to be linked to an eIDAS node. So we are basically offering a bridge between OAuth 2 and SAML 2 in a transparent way for application providers. So basically, here, when you have an application, sorry, I lost the mouse. Here, you have registered an application here in Keyrock, and a user wants to log in your application. The user is able to use his or her local eID for logging in the application. But from the point of view of the service, it's totally transparent. So you, as a developer or as a provider of this application, you have not to modify nothing in the flow. So you will continue using OAuth in order to create access token. You are able to continue using the same policies you previously defined for your service. But when the user gets the IDP, Keyrok, in order to introduce the credentials, the user is able to select if he or she wants to use the username and the password previously created in Keyrok for authenticating, or if the user wants to use the local EID, for instance, the digital certificate, in order to authenticate in the platform. Then, using, of course, the previously configured information for the application in Keyrok, we establish a SAML flow with the local EIDAS node and use the EIDAS specification in order to finally generate the access token with the public information about the user. So yeah, this is very, very, very interesting also, and I would like you to test this feature because it's really, really nice. Okay, last thing is about data usage control. This is a complex feature that probably needs a specific session in order to talk about this. But we have a lot of information published in FIWARE documentation. We have also a lot of seminars and webinars we have published in order to check the details about this. But basically, we are offering a framework in order to not only offer data access control, so not only deciding who can access a specific, for instance, data set provided by a user, but a data provider, but also the actions that the data consumer is allowed to perform in the provided data. So not only to manage the access, but also the future usage of the data. This is totally integrated with the components with Draco, Cosmos, and so on, the different big data and processing generic enablers we are offering in FIWARE. And basically, yes, as I said to you before, the framework allows to create a trust environment in which data providers and data consumers, thanks to Keyrok and some advanced components that we have included there, can check every time after accessing data what is happening with the data. So the different processing that the data consumers are doing with the data after accessing them. So yes, please, if you are interested in this, search for information, because there are a lot of videos and documents explaining this. Also research papers we have done, because this is a very, very new feature we are working on right now. But there is a first version already available, and yes, please go there, check the information, and of course, if you have interest or you have doubts about how to using this feature, let us know, and we will be very happy to help you. Finally, here's some links to the different courses, tutorials, reference documentation, source code. And that's all from my side. Yes, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to help you. And yes, not just right now, also after the training, please use the official channels or my personal email address in order to contact me and to try to solve any doubt you could have. So I don't know, Jason, if you want to have here a break before passing the floor to Alvaro.
What I would suggest we do is type some questions in the Q&A. I suggest we have a 5-minute break to give everyone a little bit of air. I'm going to go off and get a cup of coffee. And if you, whilst you're getting your coffee and what have you, and you've got the question, you can come back and answer the questions when we come back, and then we'll do the API umbrella bit afterwards. So we've already started getting some questions up there on the list. Keep typing them in. We won't answer them now. Let's all have a little break for 5 minutes, and
Okay.
we'll start again at 25 to. So another 5 minutes.
Okay.
I need a coffee. I don't know about the rest of you, but I need a coffee. Thank you very much, Alvaro, whilst you're at it. I don't know if you've got decent tea and coffee facilities where you are, but
Yes.
I'm at home, so I'm happy enough.
Okay, so see you in 5 minutes.
See you back in 5 minutes. Just grab the coffee. That's better.
Okay, yes, one.
All right. Shall we continue? There is at least one question in the chat. First question is saying, are there some laboratory with the components to play with? Do you want to answer that one, Alvaro, or shall I take it?
Yeah, I think Alvaro Arranz is going to show some examples about use.
Yes, I want to show some demos about how to use Keyrok and how to use Appian and so on. So
yeah,
this part is going to be covered.
Within the FIWARE tutorials, there are a load of Docker Compose exercises which have got some Keyrok users in there. They've got a PEP, they've got auth-deforce, they've got a description of how things work. So you can spin up a simple system which will work and play with it. You can look at the interfaces and so on and so forth. A second question, which I'll get Alvaro to type his answers, is on your final slide. There are a load of links. Could you post them into the chat?
Yeah, I have just pasted the important ones, let's say, or the main ones in the chat. So yeah, they are available there.
Is there something in the USA which is or the Americas which is equivalent to the IDAS?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Yeah, I cannot give you the strong answer there, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not pretty sure. So yeah, we will check it, and you can.
I haven't seen anything either. As far as I know, EIDAS is a initiative of the European Union. So, and I believe it's just European citizens who can get hold of it. So, if you were, say, a British citizen, you'd have difficulty getting into the system these days. I'm German, by the way. So I can get around there. They're not kicking me out of Europe yet. I'm based in Berlin. Anyway, if there's no further, of course, any further questions, keep on putting stuff into the comments, and we'll continue to answer. But we're going to have a bit of a change now. Instead of having Alvaro talking, we can have Alvaro talking instead. So over to you, Alvaro Arranz.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Okay, so I'm going to show more details about Appian Vela, and also I'm going to make some demos about the usage of Keyrok and Appian Vela, also with Appian Vela, and how all the stuff works together to have a working environment. We are going to play with simple scenarios, but it's going to be a good demo for having an idea of how all the components work together. Okay, so the first thing is my presentation. I'm Alvaro Arranz. I'm CEO of FIWARE, also co-founder. We and my colleagues at FIWARE started working on FIWARE from the very beginning, also as Alvaro Alonso and so on. So we have been working on different areas of the FIWARE community. We, for example, we are the owner of two of the components, the main components. Well, we have also some incarnation ones, but the first one is WireCloud, that is a mass-app platform, a dashboard tool for creating. So it's for creating dashboard with integration with FIWARE, and for example, also has integration with Keyrok for users and so on, and also with evidently with the context blocker for retrieving data from there and so on. Also, we are owners of the business app ecosystem, the marketplace component that is led by Francisco La Vega, one of the workers of FIWARE and CTO. And well, we have also a library for connecting with the context blocker when using NGSI version 2 and NGSI LD. it's a library for JavaScript, and that is NGSI.js. And well, also we work on other components. For example, in the API umbrella component, we participate and we are collaborating, evolving the source codes and so on. So well, so we are part of the technical steering committee and so on. So well, we are very involved in the FIWARE community. Okay. So let's start. I'm going to make the presentation. Well, for the first part is presenting what is API Umbrella. Well, API Umbrella is a component that is initially developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of America, United States. We have evolved it to work with the FIWARE components. So in this regard, it is implementing PAP and PDP features inside FIWARE. Thus, regarding these evolutions that are going to be explained later. And the key here is composed of different components. It's using engines for load balancing, Apache traffic for rate limiting and so on, and Elasticsearch for storing logs regarding the request and so on. But the idea here is that is going to be in front of the API interfaces and backends that you want to protect. Here, the point is that, as you know, when you create a server for HTTP services, you have to bind this service to one specific port, that is 18 or the HTTP version 443. So you can only have one service listening to this port. So one of the key points from this interface is that supports configuring different certificates and so on. So you are able to serve different domains from this API Umbrella instance. This is important to be able to provide different services using different domain names or path names. So the main concept regarding API Umbrella is that you have a page where you can configure API backends and website services. When the important part here is the API backends, because you have control regarding different things about the API interface, for example, authentication, authorization, so on. From the part of websites is because as you are consuming this HTTP port, along those API backends, probably you have some websites. So websites are more or less like redirections. In this sense, API Umbrella, the only thing that makes is to redirect the request to the appropriate microservice or whatever you have.
One quick interruption. Sorry about this, Alvaro. If you've got any slides, we can't see them at the moment. So we're seeing you talking. So
thank you. I think that I was presenting. Okay. Share screen. Sorry. Now you see the screen?
Yes, that's better.
Better. All right. So, well, I'm going to stay here a bit more because you were able to see the slide, but in the end, it's what I have been saying. So, more or less, this is the interface. We are going to show this in real time, so you are going to see it in a better fashion. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Well, API Umbrella by default implements what is the API keys. API keys are just a key that is that you have to use for accessing the APIs. So it has support for managing these API keys, but well, those API keys are not renewed, so they last forever and so on, and it's not within is not the best approach for authenticating users. So what we have done is we have integrated this with Keyrock. So one of the this is configurable. So you can enable API keys and Keyrock both at the same time, or you can disable API keys for and only use Keyrock and so on. So we have integrated with Keyrock, so you can make a request to your API interfaces using O2 Viral tokens or JSON web tokens, whatever. In any case, they are used in the authorization headers and so on. We have also integrated with a part of Keyrock regarding application roles. So as we have said, API Umbrella is also part of the where you are defining the rules for accessing the services. So, well, in Friday, we are going to have an advanced session with all the stuff regarding i4Trust. That is a new evolution for, because, for example, in this case, the policy is not defined on API Umbrella itself, but in the authorization registry that you have to store the policies and so on. It's going to be shown on more details on Friday. We are going to have a first approach at the last part of this presentation, but it's going to be shown deeper on Friday. Okay. In this case, if you are using the i4Trust framework, the policies are stored in Keyrock because it's also one of the components, but are not stored on API Umbrella itself. API Umbrella is going to be in charge of checking that the policy allows to pass the request or not. So it's going to be to take the decision about if the request is going to be accepted or not. Okay, this integration is more or less, we have this specific implementation with Keyrock, but it's also using other O2 IDMs. For example, we have it integrated with Keycloak that can also be used using JSON web tokens. Well, in this case, Keycloak has a different approach in some details. For example, there are global roles that are not supported by Keyrock. But if you are using Keycloak, you have this. There are other things about Keycloak, but the default is that in that case, for example, the policy has to be defined inside the API Umbrella. Okay. Well, one of the first, the main concept regarding API Umbrella is the definition of what is an API backend. So an API backend is a microservice, a service that is inside your architecture, and you are putting API Umbrella before to protect it using authentication and authorization. there are different mechanisms for configuring how this is done. So, for example, we have also we also have support for mapping different API services on the different path of the URL. So you can have a domain with different APIs in the same domain, but in different path sections and so on. And also you can provide some details, for example, in the configuration. You can provide, for example, if the backend has authentication for the communication and so on, you can provide all those details for creating the connection with the microservice. Also has support for rel limiting and other features like that. The part for this section regarding sub-URLs is the things about also creating different policies depending on the path. So it's not only that you can map different backends to the different paths, but inside a API backend, you can provide different policies depending on the path. And there are other details, like, for example, the HTTP method or some required headers. Okay. For example, this is useful, as I say here. For example, if you have you want to provide different policies for the different tenants on a context broker, for example, you can provide the requirements of the regarding, for example, if you need you want to ensure that the request has some role, you can make it to link it also to one tenant by specifying that if the request provides a FIWARE service header with one value, then that policy has to be applied. Okay. The other section is the one regarding backends, but in this case, as we say, is only a thing regarding linking the domain with the service that is providing the website. When you define a website, the thing is that you are not requiring authentication, and you are not going to configure anything about this. It's just a redirect. So in this case, you are saying, for example, that the accounts, the accounts.oplafy.eu is going to be served by one service. In this case, for example, the Keyrock. And everything, authentication and all those details is going to be managed by that service itself and not by API umbrella. Okay, the last part on the this theoric part is this part about that API umbrella. One of the things that is also doing is recording all the accesses to the different API backends, all the calls with different response codes and so on. So this is stored in an Elasticsearch instance that they have an interface that you can use for exploring the data. But for example, if you want, as the data is in Elasticsearch, you can use Kibana, for example, for doing other analysis about the requests and so on. But the thing is that you can have analytics and security reports using this data. From the API umbrella interface, you have three tools. That is the API drill down that allows you to see requests per service and path. You can also see the data by the request that is made per each of the users. And also has integration with databases for IP addresses and so on, so you can check from where the location the requests are done. So you can have information regarding if you have people from France or whatever country making requests or that kind of details. Okay, so now I'm going to make some samples regarding how to use Keyrock and all those components. So, well, this is the default aspect of a Keyrock server. Well, I don't know if I can provide you later the link. So maybe, for example, Jason can provide you the details, as he has said. There are some FIWARE tutorials. So those all components are have a Docker image that can be used using different technologies: Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, Kubernetes. There are different technologies. You have some tutorials that show you how to make simple deployments, and there are other tutorials using Helm charts and other technologies. So it's a matter of collecting all those information, and you're using those Docker images, you are going to be able to deploy your custom Keyrock instances and so on. I don't know if today, but there are also details about how to deploy Keyrock and Preamble and so on regarding deploying i4Trust framework, because, for example, we are merging everything that we are doing on the official Keyrock instance, but, for example, there are some features that are currently on a branch, and there are specific Docker images for using some of the features that are going to be used on for Trust deployment. Okay, so that part is going to be provided using other links and so on. But, for example, for what is deploying a normal Keyrock, there are a lot of information. And for i4Trust, it's just a matter of changing the image and probably providing some other configuration details like certificates and so on for defining the participation and so on. Well, those details are going to be some later, but I think that also is a good idea to have a first deployment without i4Trust, and then you can evolve your installation to use i4Trust technologies and so on. Okay, so when you install Keyrock, there are some environment variables and some configuration parameters that allow you to configure the default admin user. But, well, in this case, we have just well, I have my account, so I am admin user. So we have here the default tools for a normal user that are the home organization application, but there are also those links that are linked for an admin user. So the first thing is to have, or the main use of Keyrock is to have users. So the most useful section in this case is the user section, where you have details about all the users that are currently registered on the Keyrock instance. There are different options. This is from a point of view of an administrator. Really, when you are a user, you just you can only edit your profile. That are there are here are some menus for putting that. It's not as hard. And well, one of the first thing is to know how to manage your users. So this section allows you to disable, enable, edit, delete users, create new users. So for example, for this scenario, we can create some users. Sorry. So this is, for example, a creation of a user. And the user is first created, and then you can promote it to be administrator, or you can add roles and so on. But the first thing is to create the user. From this administration form, you have different options for the user. The idea is that when you create the user, if you can create it, disable, and enable it later, you can leave it disabled and send an email to the user. So the idea here is that the email is going to provide the link for enable the user. So those options can be selected depending on what you want to do. For example, we can create this because, for example, this email is also not existing. So it's better to do that. Also you can, because I want to sign out. Okay, there is also support for having this in-app features, so users can also be created by itself. So you don't have to create; you have to choose depending on your scenario. Maybe you want to disable this in-app feature and work with manual creation of users, or you are not going to use these features. This is more or less the support for for creating users and so on. Okay. Once you have the user, you can, for example, create tell what are the okay. Let's create another user. Then oh, sorry. I don't know why I was. The idea is to click on the authorize because there are no any i4Trust user on there. Sorry. Okay, so this way you are telling that the i4Trust owner is also an admin. Okay. We can also create well, we can use others user for. Okay, so I'm going to sign out and create this. Okay, so this is an other administrator. Here there is a section for application and organizations. The other part that is interesting before going to the application section is the organizations. So, for example, we can create a new organization, a company, a description. And once created, you have a section for the members and the applications. So, for example, we have other users. For example, there are example users. We can add more members. My user, that is the one that has created the organization, is going to be linked with the owner, and we have also members. So the idea is the owners are going to be able to modify the member list, and a member is just one user. Okay, this is the only the two roles that are available. I'm going to add another customer. Okay. The next thing and the main point of the of Keyrock is creating applications. So you have the application that are owned by you or by your organizations, and you have also the idea of organizations that are authorized on other applications. Okay, so this is going to see just in a moment, but the idea is that when you have the applications, you can have this application linked to users or to organizations. And when this link is done, that is when you do the authorization step, you have those applications in the authorized tab. Okay, so this is regarding the applications you have access to and not the ones that are you providing. Okay, and there are also the purchasings that are the ones that are you the purchase role. So we are going to create, for example, an application. Well, we are going to show others, but this is a test application. You have to provide the URL where is the application. For example, this callback URL is the one that is used for the authorization code. I don't know what is your experience with Auth2, but there are different flows. The authorization code is the default. That is the one that is using this kind of integration that is done, for example, using Google or other Auth2 services, or for example, Facebook or whatever, where if you want to log in a third-party application using, for example, Google, you are going to be redirected to the Google login page, where you can provide your username and your password, and then you are going to be redirected to the application. So this is the usual flow. And in this part, you have to define what is the URL that is going to be used for when the user authorize or, well, there are different parameters. This kind of integration is usually done using OAuth2 libraries. So you have to refer to the documentation of those libraries and so on. But the idea is that once the users access or denies the access to the data that is required by the application, when using the login, then you are validated using this callback URL, and this is a parameter for checking that the final URL is the correct one. Okay, so it's a matter of no, because this callback URL is one of the parameters that is based on when you are doing the authorization. So to avoid crafting a URL for retrieving the authorization of this login, you have to provide it so it is checked. Okay, there is also one async out callback URL that is used for this single sign out experience. This I don't know. I think that you don't require, but we can provide. We can provide. Okay, so here you can support for providing the details about what authorization flows are going to be affected. For example, there are different. This resource owner password is just providing the password using a post request. So maybe you have to filter those to provide a more secure experience with Kirok, because, for example, this one, maybe if you need it, you have to enable, you have to select whatever, depending on your requirements and so on, what all of those flows are correct for your scenario. And, for example, maybe those can be disabled. This one about the refresh token is very useful because the idea here is that Kirok, this is a flow that is combined with the others. So if you use the authorization code, you are going to have an access token, maybe also an ID token, or depending on the usage. And if you mark this refresh token workflow, then you are going to be able to refresh the tokens, because tokens has a period of time about validity. So when the default is 1 hour, so after 1 hour, the access token that is retrieved using the authorization code, if you don't use the refresh token, is going to be invalid. If you have this refresh token, instead of using again the authorization code, you can use this refresh token to have a new authorization access token that is going to be able to be used for accessing the app interfaces and so on. Okay. Okay. Here there is also one option. For example, as we are now logged with this i4Trust owner, but we have created this organization, we can decide if this application is going to be owned by the users or by the organization. Okay, no matter here at the moment. Here you have support for providing an avatar for the application, and here there is a point that is important also, that is for creating the roles that are being managed by the application. What you are going to define here are just the name of the roles. So, I mean, you have support for creating the names. For example, there is going to be an admin role, but the logic regarding what is going to provide this role is going to be managed by the application. Or, for example, if we use API Umbrella, we can use it for creating the policies. So we can say that only admin, users with the role admin can make a request and so on. Okay. This has also a section for creating policies that has been explained more or less by Alvaro Alonso, but we are not going to show how it works. But this is has integration with other of the components, Wilma and the other components. Okay, once you have created this application, there are different sections. Here there are the parameters that are used for configuring the author. If you, for example, create an application that is going to use Keyrock like an identity provider using the OAuth 2 configuration, you have to provide usually these parameters that are used for the authorization, for the authentication flows. Okay. There are other configurations that are also more or less explained by Álvaro Alonso in what can be done, but we are not so in this demo how to use it. But you have this PIP proxy configuration. You can register them. You can also register devices, IoT sensors, using these sections. There are other sections regarding trusted applications, regarding this is a little advanced, and we are also not going to show it, but it's for allowing other applications to retrieve information about the application, about the roles and so on so another application be able to ask for the roles of users in this application. And then you have this section regarding the authorized users and authorized organization. The idea here is there are the users that are registered to access this application and have allow this application to retrieve information from them and also to log in. Also, when after the users access this application and so on, for example, if we use the password grant, you have to add them by hand. For example, we use customer here. You are also able to provide the roles that are going to be assigned to the users. Okay, so I'm not going to use the authorization code flow, so I cannot show it. But if you use the authorization code flow, when the user is going to be present with the login page, is going to authorize the application to access the data about the user, and then you have the user here, and you have the option to add roles by using this user interface. Well, as also Álvaro Alonso said, there is also a API interface that can be used for doing that. It's not only using the user interface, but I mean, from the point of view of the user interface, has to be done here by hand. Okay. Also, the aspect regarding roles regarding there is a specific section for roles. I think that is better if I change some of the role name, because the idea is that, for example, here regarding the organization, you can also link the roles of the organization itself. I think it is better if I go to the organization and rename them. No, sorry. So we can provide the role to the different roles of the organization. So, for example, we can provide, say that the owners of that organization are going to have the provider role on the application, and members are going to be admin. Maybe it's better this way, okay? But the idea is that you have here the title of the role on the organization, and here the roles that are on the application. So you can grant roles to the different user of the company by means of using the roles instead of using individual permissions for each of the members. Okay. Okay, more or less this is everything. We are going to make some tests with a different aspect regarding this using Postman. So, for example, we are going to show what is the password grant. Okay, so the idea here in your solution is to use some kind of library. There are different libraries for the different programming languages and frameworks and so on. So you have to choose, but the main idea is that you usually are going to use the authorization code flow, but the parameters that are critical are the client ID and the client secret that are used for authentication the application. So providing this, well, this is for using the password grant that we are using this feature from Postman, that is, you can provide the username and password. When you make the password grant, you have to provide the authentication using this authorization header, using the basic header. So by using this tab, we are going to have the correct value for the authorization header. So we are making use of this. Then this is the body that has to be provided for creating sorry, this is not the body. This is the body that has to be provided for achieving an access token, that is the username, the password, and telling that you want to use the grant type password. Okay, so this is the thing. Well, I think that you have disabled those credentials. Okay, so we have an access token. Yeah. Okay, and we have this refresh token that is that allows us to refresh this access token. Well, it's better to use it before the expiration time, but allows you to have a new access token without having to provide the password of the user and so on. Okay, so this is more or less for checking. The other thing that is very common on the O2 world is to have an endpoint for having details about the user, and is the default scope that is granted to when you ask for an access token. You by default, when you ask for an access token, you are going to use the scope for being able to retrieve information about the user. So in the case of the Keyrock, the path is just /user. You have to provide the token. In this case is using the bearer and the token. Well, this is from another use. So the idea is you have to copy the bearer token and you have to use it. Once you have provided this, you can have details regarding the user. Okay, you have different details. For example, things regarding the organizations the user belongs, the email, the name, and the other details. Okay. Well, going into to merge this with being able to access an API service and so on. The idea is to be able to use those tokens on the on a API. Okay, so for testing this, I'm going to use one of them of my applications. So, for example, we have this API access that is the access for accessing the context broker on our system. Okay, so well, this is API Umbrella. This is more or less the login page. You have an email and a password. Here there are different things. For example, just when you install API Umbrella, you are going to be asked for creating an account, and then you are going to be able. Sorry. Son demos. Okay, so once you log into the API Umbrella, you have those sections regarding the analytics, the users that are going to be managed by API Umbrella. Those users means what are the users? Those users are taken from Keyrock in this scenario, okay? But when you use API Umbrella alone, you have to create here the customers. When you create here the customers and the users, this way is the way for creating the API keys and so on. But well, the important or the main part is here on the API backend website backends list that allows you to configure all the API backends. Okay, so well, I'm not going to create any API backend because I will need a domain and I don't have a certificate for it. But I'm going to explain you how to create those API backends just by showing the details of one of them. Okay, so the first thing is to provide a name. You have support for telling what are the protocol that is used by the microservice or the backend service. The idea here, is, for example, is as you see, we are using Umbrella with certificates, so there are different options. One option is to use API Umbrella with certificates and the backends just using plain protocol, for example, HTTP. Depending on your architecture, it probably is better to use HTTPS or not, depending. But the idea is, depending on the communication with the backend, if it's encrypted with a VPN, for example, or whatever, then you are not required to use HTTP. Well, depends. That is up to you for knowing what are the architecture and so on. So here you have a list of servers depending on the deployment. For example, if you use Docker Swarm or whatever, maybe you have also here, for example, some load balancer, so you don't have to listen all the services, well, all the domains. But if not, you are able to provide the list of services, so you can provide different instances of the backend. So API Umbrella is going to be able to load the balance the load on the different services, and so on. The other thing is you have here support. This have two tasks. The first one is the value you are going to add here is the one that is going to be used for matching the request. So, for example, in this case, we are creating an API that is going to capture all the requests that are using this host name and is going to redirect this request to those services. You have a support for rewriting the host header is depending on the scenario is useful or not, but the common thing is to maintain the same name. You can also support for doing some rewrites on the path at the path level. And the thing that the important configuration regarding authentication and so on is in this part. There are different parameters, like for example, to add some get query string parameters, adding some headers. For example, these requests come from API umbrella. You can also support for if the backend service needs some basic authentication, you have the option for adding here the configuration. And the important thing here is you have this check that is telling that the authentication is not going to use just the API keys, but keylock this application, the configuration on this application regarding roles and so on. So, for example, this ID corresponds to this one, the one of this application. Okay, is also this one. Okay, so the idea is that we want to link this API with this application on keylock. You can add more details about you require some headers with one value or whatever. In our case, the default, for example, for the HTTPS is to require HTTPS. Here, for example, we are configuring this, but on the global levels, we are, we can change it. For example, we are telling in the previous configuration that we are not requiring here where you see when you read API keys, it means any kind of authentication. So this means we disable that request to this API don't require an authorization header with the credential. We can provide this, change this, and provide this one. There are other things regarding i4Trust that are going to be shown, I think, on Friday. But the main point here is that this is the default configuration. When the default requirements that has to be met but a request to be allowed by default. So, for example, we can require some roles that mean, for example, you have also también support for limiting the amount of requests that can be used done by a client. I'm going to leave this as done. Then this is the default configuration. You have support for creating different policies for the different paths. So this section is for this. For example, with this option that required, we can, for example, tell that for retrieving the version details about the service don't require roles. So, for example, here you have support for adding more require headers and so on, or you can disable API keys. Also, for example, you have support for adding more roles. In this case, it's not going to make sense because we are disabling API keys for authentication, so it has no sense. Okay. For example, we have also here a rule for post. So, for example, we can require one role when we want to accept a post request to one path. In this case, whatever. For example, posts are usually used for validating. So the idea is that you can have different scenarios. For example, allowing anyone without API keys to read from the content blocker, and requiring some roles for being able to write. So the idea is to allow this. And this flag is also important because, for example, if we define some required roles on the global section, adding more roles here is going to be the combination of both lists. So, for example, if in the global we have super admin and admin, we are here we are going to require both roles. But by enabling this flag, we are telling that we are going to override the ones from the global require settings and only require this one. Okay, so this can be done. Okay. Well, there are other sections regarding more things. For example, regulating some additive methods and so on, and the balancing, the algorithm for balancing requests and so on. But well, from the point of view of this presentation, are not very important. Okay, once you have done the changes, you have to click on the save, and the changes are not going to be applied on the fly. You have to go to this publish changes section. So here you can check what are the changes, okay? And once you think everything is correct, you have to click on publish, okay? Once you have this done, this is going to be applied. And for example, we have done that we have configured this API interface for requiring tokens. So we can see that the different configuration parameters are going to be applied. For example, you have this error that is telling you that you have not provided the API key. We can change it again to to disable. We can check that while we don't click on the publish, this change is not going to have any effect. So now that we have made the publish, we can support for retrieving the data, and so on. Regarding, for example, this one, that we have this this FIWARE service, we can try with this. Well, in any case, we have done that the post, we have configured the post will require an admin user. So, well, here I don't have an authentication here, so it's not going to work. Okay. So, for example, If we use a customer, okay, if we provide these credentials, they are correct, but they are invalid. And if we do this with owner, and we grant the admin role to the owner, because I think that we have not done it. Okay. If we do this, demo it. Well, I don't know what happened. This well, oh, okay. This one. I don't know what happened. For example, this one. Sorry, but I don't know what happened. The idea is that it will allow you to access. Okay. Well, more or less, this is the part regarding API configuration. The other thing is this one regarding, for example, what is a backend. But in this case, the configuration is very simple because you have just to provide the domain, what is the protocol used by the backend service, the name of the backend service, and the port. Okay. We can also go to the analytics part, where you can see the access to the different services and so on. You have the different supports. For example, you can check what are the requests that have been done by a user. You have support for changing the time. You can retrieve this information on form of requests from different countries and so on. Okay, so you have this kind of analytics. This is more or less everything regarding API Umbrella. And we are going to continue with the presentation regarding what is done with the architecture used with i4Trust, with an overview. Okay, so there I'm going to present two scenarios. And the first one, we have two different participants. So the idea here is, in this scenario, there are two participants, but the idea is to have multiple participants and allow the difference. So there is also this component that is the trust provider, that is the one that is in charge of maintaining the list of the participants that are trusted. So, for example, I want to provide this idea because it's going to be used in the request and so on. For example, we have a marketplace and we want to allow accessing users from different companies to this marketplace, but you don't want to be the master of the identity provider. So the idea here is that the people that is working in this company are managed by this company. So the company, this company has an identity provider where users are registered. And the marketplace is going to use this identity provider for having the credential of the users. But the idea is not to the usual approach where you configure to allow users from, for example, let's say Google or whatever, Instagram, Facebook, or whatever. The idea here is that there are these trust providers. So any company that is registered in this trust provider service can provide the credentials for accessing the marketplace. So the integration in this part, this regard, is with the marketplace and the trust provider, in the sense that every provider that is registered, any participant that is registered in this catalog is going to be able to provide the credentials for the users. We are going to use this for one example with one participant. But the idea is that you can use whatever participant that is registering the trust provider. So in this scenario, each organization has their own infrastructure, can use whatever. In this sense, for example, when there are some specifications, so we are providing Keyrock as the implementation reference for being used here. But the idea is that you can use whatever identity provider is following this specification and so on. But in any case, each organization has its own infrastructure and has his own deployment. The trusting between the different participants is provided by this trust provider, where you have to be registered. You have to have a participant ID, and you have to have a label about that you are trusted. So here, for example, the marketplace that is going to be used in this scenario can have their own local users, but the idea is to allow users from other organizations. So the workflow for using this is that the user that is using this access the portal. In the portal, it is going to be able to select from the different participants that are defined in the trust provider. So it's going to be able to select what IDM to use. In this case, it's going to use participant 2. So the marketplace has to do some requests and redirect the user to the identity provider of the participant 2. The participant 2 is listening the trusted provider and is going to be taken by the participant, and we are going to see as this trust also is maintained on the request and so on. Once the user is logged in the participant 2, is going to provide the details to the marketplace. Okay, so the idea is that also participant 2 has to trust on the marketplace for knowing that he is not going to do anything bad with the credentials. So here, the participant 1, that is the marketplace, has to create a JSON wait token. We have not talked about the JSON wait tokens, but JSON wait tokens are JSON structures that are composed on 3 different sections. One is the headers that provide some metadata about the data that is being provided on the payload. In this scenario, there is an important field that is this one that provides the complete certificate change of the party, of the participant, because in the JSON web token has 3 sections. The one is the headers, and as we have said, the payload, and there is a third that is not shown here, but is a signature. So the idea is that the participant, when create this kind of assets, is going to to create a signature using these certificates to be provided along this data. This way, we can provide the content has been created by the issuer, well, the owner of this certificate. So there are some details here. This is, for example, because we had to implement this. Probably this has to be implemented on your side. So here the thing is that we have those fields that are more or less standard on JSON web tokens and OpenID Connect and so on. That are this one about the subject that is providing an identifier for the one is creating this payload. I don't know if you see the mouse, but I hope because I'm making some movements with the mouse. Okay, and the other one is the audience. That is the identifier of the entity that is expected to be the audience for this message. So we are telling that this message is for this company, that is the one that is linked with participant 2 in this case. Okay, in this case is the Happy Pets company. Okay, there are other fields that are more or less standard, and as like the expedition and so on. There is also here, because the idea is that we are replacing the authorization code flow. So instead of doing the usual redirect to the identity provider portal for the login, we are making this request first. That is the one that is going to do the authentication, because the idea here is that, as we have seen, in the normal O2 protocols and OpenID protocols, we have to create by hand the application. Here, we have this trust provider, but the idea here is not to create, is that to avoid the creation of those applications. So provider participant 2 has nothing to do with the marketplace, in the sense that you don't have to pre-register this application on participant 2 or nothing, and you don't have to do those steps. So this is a way for providing the credentials and telling that the request is going to be made by the marketplace and so on. As we see here, we have the complete certificate chain the idea is that this is the initial data that has to be provided, but then so we create this JSON web token, okay, and it's provided on the authorized endpoint on the participant 2 IDP. And then participant 2 has to do two things. One is to validate and use the data that is coming on the JSON web tokens, but also has to verify the signature with the certificate change, and also make some request to the trust provider app interface to check that the participant that is sending these details, because for the first thing is when you have the certificates, you know that that message has been created by the one of the certificates, and with the certificates and these details, you check that the party is one of the trusted ones on the trusted provider. So if everything goes well, this provides a link on the local location header that is the one that is going to be used for redirecting from the marketplace. So everything we have described before this step is done on the backend part, and just when the user selects the identity provider, say that he wants to log in with a participant 2. And if everything goes well, you have a location header, then the marketplace redirect to the URL that is provided here, and this header should provide a link, a URL from the identity provider. The user is going to provide the username and the password, and the identity provider is going to use the callback URL for providing the code and following the similar steps on the authorization code flow. Okay, so this is going to provide a code. This code, because I don't know if you know the O2 flow, this code has to be used on the token endpoint, providing then the client ID and client secret parameters from the O2 participant, and you then have this access token. Okay, this access token can be used for accessing APIs from participant 2, but the only thing that is wanted in this scenario, for example, from the marketplace, is that if you are able to retrieve this access token, it means that the credentials are correct and are well. For example, maybe the marketplace is going to use this access token to retrieve details from the user endpoint from participant 2. Okay, but from the point of view of the login, once you have an access token, you know that the login credentials are correct. Also, we are using JSON web tokens. So, for example, well, I think that I have explained a bit more. Okay, so this is the step regarding calling the token endpoint and having the access token. You have to provide once again a JSON web token generated in the step 1. It's the only thing that I was missing, and the code that is retrieved using the previous step. Also, the token, in this case, we are using JSON web tokens also for the details. So we have here, an ID token that provides the ID of the user and other details, probably you have to use the user endpoint for retrieve more details. For example, in Kiro for retrieving the roles and so on, if you want, depending on the scenario. Okay. This is the last scenario that is going to be presented in this presentation is regarding accessing that data on another service. So in the previous scenario, our intention was only to know details about the user for allowing them to access. So it's a sign-in feature. Here we are going to access data. Here the point is that the user or the machine that want to retrieve the data is from participant 2. So you have to create again a JSON web token. Always you have to provide the information about the subject. In this case, instead of being an application, this subject is providing an identity of a user. Okay, it's a different thing. And the audience is the ID on the trust provider catalog of the participant 1 server. In the JSON web tokens, we have to provide that is the policy. This part regarding delegation evidence is the policy. This is the root policy because when these access tokens, these JSON web tokens is evaluated by, in this case, a pre-umbrella, for example, you have to validate that this policy is correct. Okay, so you have to create a JSON web token issued by the identity provider of participant 2 with this aspect that is going to provide this delegation evidence from itself. The PEP proxy, in this case, API umbrella, is going to validate the JSON web token signature and that the participant 2 is one of the trusted one. Okay. Also, is going to use this delegation evidence for checking that the policy is working, but also is going to use these calls to the authorization registry for validating, in this case, the entity that is in charge of providing the trusting of this, the validity of this policy is the authorization registry and not the trust provider. The authorization registry is part of the of each of the organizations. So in this case, there is this delegation evidence is coming from participant 2, but is also have a change. So because, for example, this is a delegation evidence for that is targeting the user. So this is granted by the participant 2 identity provider or the management of the participant 2. But this should be allowed by another policy that has to be on participant 1. So the authorization registry in this case, well, there are different chains, but the authorization registry is on the participant one, the root. So this delegation evidence has to be backed by another delegation evidence by another policy that is saying that participant 2 has the ability to grant permissions about this data to the users. Okay, if everything is correct, then the request is allowed. Okay, I think this is very intensive, so I don't know if you have questions.
You can start putting in questions into the
Yes.
Q&A or the chat.
Well, I'm reading the ones on the chat. So, for example, are there API to remote create manage uses? Yes, because you have an API from Keyrock. Okay. Yes, for example, API Umbrella. This question regarding how to install API Umbrella, there are also Docker images, and also as I say, there are going to be some templates regarding deploying all the components on using health charts and so on. This is regarding Kubernetes, but for example, with API Umbrella, there is also Docker Compose configuration files for that can be used for launching. Then there is also, when I try installing the FIWARE version and launching it in a browser, I get no phone. The requested URL was no phone on the server. At the contrary, well, I don't know how this has been deployed. As we have seen a working version, so maybe it has something to do with the configuration and so on. In any case, not fun. For the default files, it should be work without too much configuration. So there is also a question here regarding Docker run name, API Umbrella. Or this is the configuration that has been used. Okay. Okay. Here the problem is that you are providing a config file, so we are missing those details. For example, also in this version, maybe you have to deploy the different components. As I said, the basic, we have done different evolutions to API Umbrella, and the default API Umbrella Docker image is containing all the services required in this Docker image. For example, you have engines, Apache traffic, you have also the components that are used directly by API Umbrella, Elasticsearch. So everything is deployed in the same Docker image. One of the things that we have done is that all those components has been split. So you have to create containers for Mongo, for Elasticsearch, for everything. So maybe, for example, here you are creating just a container with the API Umbrella image. So maybe you are missing the part about deploying Mongo, Elasticsearch, and so on. But in any case, we are missing things like the config contents and so on. So I can know. Maybe you can, because I don't know if you have created some question on the FIWARE test mail list and so on. So maybe the idea is to provide all the details to have a better idea of what is the problem, because it's very hard to know at this moment what is happening here. And the location analytics work because API umbrella use a well, I don't know the name, but use a database with the location of the different IP addresses. As you maybe also, I think I'm sharing the screen. Please let me know, because I don't have another screen, so I don't know. I cannot read the questions and so on while working. But for example, sometimes you get this unknown classification. So this is a database that is updated in, I don't know in what granularity, but there is some IP addresses that have a known location, but there are other locations that are not. So also, I don't know if this is working yet with IP version 6 or not, but the idea is they have a database that provides some prefixes and so on, so they are able to detect the location of the IP address, but there is no, it's just a database.
You can use the same thing to restrict access to various subjects depending on your geolocation. Many years ago, I used to work for the National Lottery in the United Kingdom, and of course, you can't buy lottery tickets unless you are physically present in the United Kingdom, and it was always a problem in that although you can use some sort of database based on your IP to say, I'm in, Spain, I'm in Gibraltar or whatever. It doesn't always work because, of course, the IP could actually be associated to, say, a company like, I don't know, some sort of aerospace country. American Airlines, for example, would give you a US IP, even if you're actually one of their sub offices elsewhere. So this sort of analytics is not perfect, but it is based on a database of ranges of IPs which work from various countries, and of course that's close enough for most cases.
Okay, so Guy, I have seen the issue that you have opened on the FIWARE repository, and I think that we can try to provide you a solution in this issue ticket. I don't know if there is another. There are more questions. So, okay, in any case, don't hesitate to ask everything you want by email or whatever. You find a question later. Okay, I think that I have maybe Jason has provided details. Okay.
So, I put the contact details of LinkedIn right at the top of the chat, but we can put them in again if I can scroll backwards just to save people that trying to do too much.
Yeah. So that's all.
So thank you very much, Alvaro and Alvaro. As usual, I get to learn things because I don't get to play with API Umbrella as much. I knew most of the key rock stuff, but I don't get to play with API Umbrella. So it's good to see how these things come together. Like we were doing yesterday, you can see that these things build on each other. So you can see that you need to have an identity, and if you've got an identity, you can use API Umbrella, and if you use API Umbrella, you can connect it to iShare to get a full distributed degree of trust across multiple components. In the same way as we're dealing with JSON and then at context and then NGSI yesterday, we've got the same chain of elements today. So this is the reason why I've done it in various different parts. As usual, we'll be continuing this marathon tomorrow. So if you've got any more questions, you can always ping me or ping these two guys. As I said, the links are back in the chat. I'm trying to find out what I put in the chat. There's a day ago, so I'm too far back now. Where are we? I'm trying to, anyway, yeah, you can scroll back through the chat yourself actually, because this it's good that we've got quite a lot of chat in here. Here's the first one. I've got Alvaro. Put this into there, and the other one is Alvaro. Where's Alvaro and Alvaro? Right. Trying to find it. Pet proxy. There we go, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. So that's Alvaro as well. Right. Okay. I'll just ping them into the chat again at the bottom, just to see what you're doing. So that's one of them. Personally, I use LinkedIn for all these business contacts because it's the easiest way to keep them all together. There we go. If you want me as well, I'll put me back on the list. You'll have to find me again. Oh, there I am. Me. Right. Let's put this one there. And yeah, I mean, the whole point about putting these contacts in, and indeed putting your own contacts in and swapping them between people and going down to the tables and what have you, and talking to people, is to improve your network, improve your links, because everyone who's going to be working with these systems will be coming across the same sort of issues. There's going to be bits which are more difficult to set up than others, and once someone solved it, then everyone will solve it. The usual channels, as Alvaro pointed out, is you can use the FIWARE help channel. Point one, we've got a contact us button on the FIWARE website. If you've got developer-specific questions, you can raise something on Stack Overflow, but of course Stack Overflow is for developer questions only and has various rules as to what's allowable. So follow their rules to do it. If you've got something that isn't necessarily programming related, like how much does this cost or whatever, how can we host this thing? There you can. There's an ask channel, ask.fiware.org, which will get various answers. And of course, if you find a bug or you're missing functionality in something, you can open an issue on the relevant component on GitHub, and this can then be prioritized, or indeed you can raise PRs on these things. There are various PRs which we've gone through on API Umbrella recently, for example. So that's probably all we've got time for today. We're actually finishing roundabout on time for a change. So one more time, thank you very much, Alvaro and Alvaro, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.